This is going to be one of the first times I'm making a video on a topic that I don't really care for. Or, not that I don't really care for it. If I didn't care for it, I wouldn't be making a video on it. But more so, I did not come up with this topic or think up this topic. Someone simply asked me to make a video on this. So it's going to be the first time that I am doing that. And so, unlike some of the topics that I've made videos on where it's more so me just putting my thoughts and conclusions that I've already made into the format of a video, and then justifying why I think they are accurate, I'm more so going to be doing this from a pretty objective and neutral standpoint. I don't really have any horse in this race, and I'm just looking at it with the information presented within the story, without the inclusion of any pretenses of any kind. I think that common consensus would heavily lean towards one of these characters over the other, but I'm going to be ignoring things like that and even my own opinion on this topic for the sake of going at it from a very neutral standpoint, and to really present the information on both of these characters' power scaling as accurate as can be. And so this is going to be broken down into like 4 pretty concrete categories: strength and or attack potency, durability, speed, and then abilities or hacks or things that can just be considered to be win cons. And so let's start out with what is more than likely to be the most obvious, and that being speed. We first know that even as far back as pre-time skip that Yamato is able to fight Ace while only in her base form and with C-Prism handcuffs. They were pretty much in a stalemate, and so she would of course go relative to this Ace. This Ace really shouldn't be that much weaker if at all from what he was during Marineford, and if anything in fact stronger because this Ace was starved in C-Prism handcuffs for like multiple days up to a week I believe. This would even help in a direct comparison to Kuzan, as Ace is capable of reacting to his attacks, meaning that even a base and slightly nerfed Yamato should be more than capable of keeping up with Kuzan's attacks and his speed. And of course, for the most prominent on-screen fight we have of Yamato, Yamato is more than capable of reacting to Kaido's attacks on several different occasions, even reacting to his Thunder Bagua, which was capable of blitzing Luffy even in his base form, while Yamato is capable of reacting to a Thunder Bagua from a hybrid Kaido. Yamato is on multiple different occasions even capable of landing attacks on Kaido, and we even see this most prominently with Divine Swiftness towards the end of their fight when Yamato is in base. And within this scene, we also have Yamato attacking alongside a Gear 4 Snake Man Luffy, post all of the amps he would get from Advanced Conqueror's Haki, and even getting faster based on shown feats, being incapable of clearing Kaido's Thunder Bagua in his base form earlier during the arc, to flat out jumping over it at later points during the arc after Kaido is actually starting to try more and even gotten stronger. It is the case that Momonosuke and Luffy were a significant distance behind Yamato in this scene, where they are matching up in speed. However, it is also the case that this is again a base Yamato, and a Yamato who is extremely fatigued from her fight with Kaido. And this is also with Luffy using Snake Man to continuously ramp up his speed. So I don't think it's far-fetched at all to claim that Yamato would be relative to this Luffy in terms of speed, had she not been fatigued from her fight with Kaido and if she was going all out in her hybrid form, where she would then be faster. A common criticism for Yamato in this fight is that Kaido is not actually going all out, and I really don't see the point in even pointing this out. Kaido does not truly begin to go all out at really any point during the rooftop prior to a Gear 5 Luffy. Only for a small period of time does Luffy truly fight a full power Kaido, and even then that's excluding Flaming Drum Dragon. I think it is clearly the case that Kaido is not trying to kill Yamato, but I think it is inaccurate to say that he is holding back to such a great extent that it inhibits the way he can fight in his own stats. That said, I do think that at a point during the fight with Luffy, he actually enjoys himself and starts to try more, and even is stated to get stronger. But still, Yamato should have comparable speed to both a Luffy and Kaido prior to that point, and prior to these statements of him getting faster. Even if you wanted to say that Kaido was holding back against Yamato, there's nothing to actually suggest that he's holding back his speed. So really there is no argument to actually be made here in regards to trying to downplay Yamato's speed feats here against Kaido, or in comparison to a Snake Man Luffy. And the entire notion itself would even go against Kaido's own words. Now again, do I think that he was trying to kill her? No. but I think there is a difference between not intending to kill someone and holding back on someone. But I mean, just to drag this point across even further and just make it clear how pretty consistent this is for Yamato to be this fast, disregarding any arguments of Kaido potentially holding back against her, again, we know that a hybrid Yamato should at least be comparable in terms of speed to a Snake Man Luffy, even accounting for the distance between them in this scene given how weakened she was and how she was in base, versus a Luffy who had just recovered and eaten a bunch of food. Luffy then powers down from Snake Man, goes into his base form, and that's where you see a lot of these speed feats from a base Luffy or a Gear 2 Luffy, clearly matching Kaido and even jumping over his Thunder Bagua. Given that Yamato would be comparable to a much faster version of Luffy in his Snake Man form, we can again reasonably say that Yamato is comparable to this Luffy, fighting a Kaido who doesn't have the same arguments of holding back as he would against Yamato. This is important because we know that a Snake Man Luffy was capable of keeping up with Kizaru during Egghead. Admittedly, this Luffy should be a bit superior than he is in Wano, as Luffy just continuously grows arc to arc, but it's also a Luffy who is not going all out against Kizaru, nor necessarily trying to defeat him, and is more so confused on why he's even taking the actions that he is. And there would simply be no way to actually determine or measure how much faster Luffy gets when going into Egghead, if at all. So there's no real reason to believe that he's now so much faster that he's not still just relative to the Yamato that he was relative to in Wano. But again, this Luffy is capable of keeping up with Kizaru in a fight and fighting pretty relative to him, to the point where Kizaru has to accelerate and go faster in order to gain an advantage against him. Which, if you've seen my video on Luffy versus Kizaru, I don't even think that this is Kizaru's speed blitzing Luffy. I think that when Luffy is putting his hand up here and we clearly see that this is like a light being shined onto him because Kizaru is turning into light, that he is either blocking his eyes because the light is too bright, in which case he cannot properly see Kizaru to begin with, or he is putting up his hand to block, in which case he is just reacting to Kizaru. Regardless of which way you look at it, I don't believe that there is a single interpretation that could lead to this being a speed blitz for Kizaru. So with Yamato showing relativity to a Snake Man Luffy, she should also be relative to Kizaru, and this is relevant because Kizaru is just flat out stated to be the fastest admiral. And while I'm not saying that Kizaru has to be blitz tiers above the admirals by any means, or that the other admirals cannot still be somewhat relative, I don't see the value in making a statement like this character is the fastest of this group if he is not pretty noticeably the fastest of this group, even beyond relativity. And we know this shouldn't apply to his accelerated speed because it simply didn't exist when this statement was made, and a statement being made to give information to the audience based upon information that the audience does not have makes no sense. As for Kuzan, the only thing that we can really say definitively is that he scales to Akainu, and most of Akainu's actual speed feats are kind of just off of a very sick, old, and extremely weakened Whitebeard. The best I think you could give Akainu is his feat of reacting to both Vista and Marco, as Marco is a character who should also be comparable to Kizaru in terms of speed. Given these statements of him flat out being relative or on the level of all of the admirals, and him fighting Kizaru both on screen and for a period of time off screen, when cutting back to the fight him being pretty much unscathed. But it is worth mentioning that Marco was fighting throughout the entirety of the war by this point, after a fight with Kizaru and being hit off guard multiple times, as well as put in C-Prism handcuffs, so this should be a weaker and slower Marco. Apart from the relativity to Akainu, there's really not much to say for Kuzan, as there's not really much to take away from his fight with old Garp. Within the first interaction, Garp just immediately speed blitzes him. Again, I think with the numerous videos I've made involving the admirals, and again specifically the video with Kizaru versus Luffy, people should kind of already know how I feel about the mental nerf stuff. For one, I think that the argument for Kuzan being mentally nerfed here is just as viable for Garp. I think that Garp inherently is just a person who bottles up his emotions and doesn't let them show, but not letting your emotions show is not the same as not feeling those emotions. Again, I think I've made my opinion on this clear quite a few times before, but I simply think there is more nuance to quote-unquote mental nerfs than people would like to give it credit for. A lot of people simply say, this character is mentally nerfed, and therefore at all times they have less AP, less durability, less speed, less reaction speed, and just less of anything by a default without any regards for the context of the situation, when I don't think that's what a mental nerf is. A mental nerf is not a status effect, it is not a debuff, it is simply the act of hesitating on something. For example, if I were to throw a punch at someone and then suddenly something happens for me not to want to hit that person anymore. I would waver, I would hold back, and then that punch would be weaker than if none of that happened and I simply wanted to punch this person. In that situation specifically, that may even make me off guard to getting hit, and therefore in that case, sure, I'm in a way less durable. But if I then get hit and we start fighting, that doesn't mean that everything else I do is now slower because I have this status effect on me called mental nerf that inherently makes everything I do slower. So when we know in this scene that Kuzan is prepared for a fight with Garp, he in fact is the first one to attack, I do not have a single reason to believe that he would have less reaction time and less reaction speed to react to Garp. Quote unquote mental nerf is not decreasing his reaction speed in this instance where he is clearly prepared for a fight. Anyways, that's my take on that. I'm not going to bring it up again, I just want to get that out of the way now. Kuzan would later be capable of matching Garp in a clash, though this is a Garp who's already been weakened by Shiryu and saving Kobe, and also been fighting for quite a while by this point, while Kuzan was essentially just, seemingly knocked out or at least put down by Garp's initial attack. The entire time that Garp is just beating on the Blackbeard pirates, Kuzan is nowhere to be found. People tend to use this instance to claim that Kuzan and Garp are equal in terms of speed, or that he is matching him in terms of speed here, and I just don't really get that notion. In this scene, the only one that's actually charging in is Kuzan. Garp is just standing still, so at best he's matching the speed at which he can punch. But even that would be weird to claim because Kuzan is running in, Garp would have to time his punch, and it's just two forms of movement that you can't really compare in terms of speed, especially since he's already charging back his fist. So I don't really get that example. I don't think that that's inherently them being equal in speed or even Kuzan matching him in speed. But you know, regardless, it's a weakened Garp anyways. And it doesn't help that Garp just then blitzes him once again after this. Now, the relevance beyond this is pretty limited because we don't have any definitive or really accurate way to compare an old Garp and Kizaru in terms of speed, but there is just nothing to go against the idea that an old Garp is genuinely, at least when in a healthy state, an entire perception blitz, if not at the very least a normal blitz tier above Kuzan in terms of speed. Even when looking back at Marineford, for example, because you could make the argument that old Whitebeard and old Garp should be extremely relative because, you know, prime Garp and prime Whitebeard are extremely relative. If anything, an old Whitebeard in Marineford should be weaker due to having a terrible condition. And in this case, when Kuzan does fight Whitebeard, he doesn't really have any speed feats on him. He actually kind of gets blitzed and is unable to react to Whitebeard's attacks, but to be fair to him, it's vibrations. You probably can't really see them or sense them in any way, or at least I'd imagine it would be difficult to do so, but I could also just be completely wrong. I'm just trying to give him a little bit of grace here. Beyond that, he does react to Whitebeard later on, which would, you know, kind of disprove the idea that Whitebeard could at least consistently blitz him. But at this point, Whitebeard also has a hole in his chest and is even more fatigued and weakened. But regardless of what Whitebeard does in Marineford, because again he is weakened when he is now off medication, when on medication he should be comparable to every other Yonko. This just due to the overall narrative surrounding the Yonkos and them literally being stated to essentially be relative. So we know that someone like Kaido and Big Mom should be relative to an old Garp, if not flat out above old Garp, who is capable of blitzing Kuzan on 2 different occasions, while this is never shown to be the case with Kaido and Yamato. So while I don't think that Yamato is blitzing Kuzan, let alone perception blitzing him, I do think it is more than fair to say that she is faster, as she just blatantly has better feats. I'm gonna briefly go over durability because I really don't think there's too much to go over here to begin with. I mean, literally the only durability feats we have for Kuzan are just normal Conqueror's Coding punches from Garp. Like, no named attack of any kind. He doesn't really tank anything from Whitebeard. And other than that, there's just Jozu punching him and making him bleed. And you could simply, wave off the Jozu comparison. I wouldn't even blame you for doing so. But I do think it's worth mentioning that I do think it's intentional that Oda had all of the admirals off guard their opponents. That being Kuzan for Jozu, Kizaru for Marco, and then Akainu for Whitebeard. I don't think it's unintentional that he had them only be able to really do anything against them or damage them when they were off guard. This alongside the fact that it is stated that Whitebeard's commanders can fight top level marines, and directly stated that Jozu fought equally to Kuzan. But essentially, the only real durability feat that Kuzan would have would be tanking Conqueror's coding punches from Garp, which if we're saying that as previously established, Kaido and old Garp are relative, if not Kaido being stronger, then Yamato should just have similar durability feats, and even more so because she does this multiple times while Kuzan pretty much only does once. There is Blue Hole, but again, he doesn't actually tank this attack. He doesn't show up until much later after Garp has been fighting Blackbeard pirates for a decent amount of time and is clearly, at least at this point, worn out to an extent, so you can't really argue that he's capable of withstanding this attack. Now there is a pretty relevant point here when referring to Kaido in his comparison to Garp, as again this is a Kaido who is not going all out against Yamato. So when referring to the narrative which paints Kaido on a similar level to Whitebeard, or an old Whitebeard rather, what Kaido is that referring to? Because there are different interpretations that can be had here. And this also affects certain statements, like for example when you're talking about Kizaru during Egghead when he says that, oh, you're definitely the guy that defeated Kaido, and people using this to kind of gauge that Kizaru knows how strong Kaido is. Like, what Kaido would Kizaru even know of? There's no point in time where Kizaru should have ever had an interaction in a combat sense with Kaido. You can't even say that he knows about Kaido's hybrid form, so is he just referring to a base Kaido? Is he referring to a hybrid Kaido? Is he referring to a stronger hybrid Kaido when he's drunk? Is he referring to a normal dragon form Kaido? Is he referring to a flaming Bagua Kaido? There are different interpretations to be had for this, but again, when we're talking about the overall narrative for the Yonkos leading up to the Wano arc, and this relativity between them, even in the Ace novel where again it's pretty much essentially just stated that they're all relative, these are not people that should know about Kaido's flaming Bagua. We know that Kaido hasn't had a genuine challenge in a very long time. Even if we're talking just general public and what they would know via the news, Kaido doesn't fight enough for people to really know exactly how strong he is or about these different forms. The general population should not know that Kaido gets stronger as he gets drunk. So I think it makes the most sense that these statements are more so in reference to just a normal hybrid Kaido. So yeah, I do think it's fun to compare even the Kaido that fights Yamato to an old Garp. You could even argue Yamato to be higher, as she does, unlike Kuzan, take named attacks from hybrid Kaido. She does use an actual ability to defend against this, that being Mirror Mountain, but she also says that she wasn't capable of defending against it. So even with this, she had to tank the attack, or at least majority of the attack. Another difference would be that unlike Kuzan, she didn't go down for any amount of time afterwards. She just immediately attacks him again. She even tanks other attacks from him directly after this. People really kind of just look past this fight because, again, Kaido's not going all out, which sure, in that regard, obviously Yamato is not Yonko level, but she is clearly comparable and capable of fighting them just like the admirals. And she doesn't even lose this fight. People kind of just wave that off as well. She tanks his Thunder Bagua, she continues fighting, and she never loses the fight. Obviously, I'm not saying that she wouldn't have lost, however, she didn't. They both end up back in their base forms, and she's clearly still capable of fighting. Also, she never used White Serpent once prior to when she used it at the end. And it doesn't really make sense after all of that for her to use a weaker attack than the ones that she was previously using. Why would she just use something that's obviously not going to do anything? Again, point being, she never uses White Serpent in her hybrid form. If you don't just baselessly assume that Thunder Bagua is her strongest attack, there is genuinely an argument that Yamato herself was not going all out. Especially when, kind of similar to Luffy during Egghead, her intention was just to stall here. This isn't even crazy to say because we know for a fact that Kid and Law were holding back their awakenings when fighting Kaido. So it's not as if it's unprecedented that someone weaker than Kaido would hold back against him. But I mean, yeah, it's pretty much the same thing as the speed point. I don't think that Kuzan is vastly above Yamato in terms of durability, and I also don't think that Yamato is vastly above him. However, I think that overall, Yamato has better durability feats, and so I would also give her durability, and so that would pretty much just leave attack potency. Now, this is where you can kind of finally use the one thing that people really argue for when it comes to Kuzan, which is his fight with Akainu. I don't think that Akainu is that impressive in terms of durability and speed to begin with, similar to Kuzan. But in terms of attack potency, I do feel that his fight with Akainu, especially with how close it was, should upskill him. I will admit it is kind of weird to judge because unlike say two people who only fight with Haki fighting each other and scaling them off of each other, you're kind of comparing elements here, and there is a level of lethality with magma that doesn't inherently associate with attack potency. Like, the fact that Akainu can burn a hole into someone, even if it does somewhat incorporate his own, force to do so, like, it wouldn't scale to someone who can literally punch a hole into someone, because it is simply lethal. There is a level of lethality to it that can't really be compared in that manner in a linear fashion. And I mean, the same goes for Kuzan even. It would be like trying to scale him over Mihawk because he can damage Jozu while Mihawk didn't. When he froze him, that's not like, you can't compare those two things. So I may even be being more charitable here than I should be, but I think it is safe to say that they should be relative in terms of attack potency. So he should be capable of doing similar damage to Whitebeard as Akainu did, such as putting holes in him. Granted, again, a weakened Whitebeard, but still. And he's also capable of damaging an old Garp, who was also granted weakened, but still. I know that some people like to argue that this, clash, very heavy quotes around clash, like, is them equally clashing. I honestly don't know why people refer to this as a clash. They literally just punched each other. There's nothing clashing here. They're just punching each other. But people use this to say that they're equal in this regard. I just don't, I don't know what people are getting from this that inherently means that they're equal. They're just punching each other. Like, I guess it's that they're both like sent flying back a little, like to similar extents, but like they don't have to be necessarily equal. I'm not saying they can't be relative, but I don't get where the interpretation of them being equal comes from. There's also the fact that, again, Garp is standing still here. He's just throwing a punch. Kuzan literally ran up to him, reeling his hand back before this punch. He has far more momentum going forward than Garp does just standing here. But anyways, I don't want to focus on that too long. I think it's fine to say that he is relative to old Garp here, and that he is clearly capable of doing significant damage to the old characters like old Garp and old Whitebeard. As for Yamato, I think just all of the exact same things can be said. Similarly to what happens with Kuzan and Garp here, both Kaido and Yamato are hitting each other. I've also seen people refer to this as a clash. That's not a clash. They're both hitting each other. But I mean, yeah, these are extremely similar situations. The only real difference is that Yamato defended against the attack. But again, on multiple different occasions, she's shown to be capable of damaging Kaido. A Kaido who, again, as we've established, is relative to an old Garp and an old Whitebeard, but even more so, should in fact be more durable than them, being a character, if not the character, who is known for his durability, and that being something that is heavily emphasized around the character. And again, unlike Kuzan, she's actually capable of matching Kaido in an attack, that being their Blast Breath. Or rather, his Blast Breath and her Glacier Fang. This actually being a far more impressive feat than I feel like people really give it credit for, because Blast Breath isn't really something that Kaido can hold back, at least based on what we've seen. There's no real reason to believe that it ever gets stronger or weaker. It doesn't involve Haki, which is what, Luffy states is getting stronger for Kaido throughout the fight. It's not him just like naturally getting stronger, no, his Haki specifically gets stronger and that then makes him stronger. So we have no reason to assume that his Blast Breath gets stronger. Blast Breath, which Gear 5 Luffy saw as threatening enough to deflect it, which then damaged a stronger Kaido than the one that Yamato was fighting. which actually would just give her feats on Kaido, the like no holding back strongest version of Kaido that we see other than Flaming Drum Dragon, a Kaido whose haki has gotten stronger during the fight with Luffy. And this is a blast breath that damages Luffy on 2 separate occasions. I know you could easily just wave off the first instance as it being a gag scene, but it's pretty clear that the second time this happens, this is something that is damaging Luffy. Also, why would Kaido use something on Luffy that he just saw didn't work, if it was the case that it hadn't worked initially? So Yamato does just like kind of objectively have Yonko level feats, at least in terms of AP, up there with the likes of a full power Kaido and a Gear 5 Luffy. And just to address the argument that's probably inevitably gonna occur when talking about this interaction, there shouldn't really be an elemental advantage here. It is even stated that Yamato is capable of countering Kaido's blast breath due to both the coldness but also the strength. In reality, it's more likely the case that they're just equal and that there is no elemental advantage on either side. So unlike durability and speed, I do think that Yamato takes this by quite a considerable margin. Kuzan just doesn't have a feat that even compares to being on the level of a Gear 5 Luffy or full power Kaido. As for overall abilities, we know that Kuzan is capable of freezing people, though this can be countered by haki. He could potentially fully freeze her, but we haven't seen him do this to anyone other than Jozu or anyone with like, really good haki, let alone Conqueror's haki or Conqueror's coding. We've also seen him make ice weapons, we've seen him form his body around attacks even if they do include haki in order to dodge them. He can make a blade to actually wield, but probably the most useful is that he can essentially reform his body using ice in the environment, or just ice in general that he leaves around. But honestly, nothing really here is a definitive win con for Kuzan. Like, I don't think he has any ability that's like, changing the tides of battle or anything. Same thing kinda goes for Yamato. We know that she can make ice walls and has, some form of ice abilities herself. Most relevant is probably Mirror Mountain, which can seemingly just defend herself against attacks. Though, as we've seen, that can be overpowered. I mean, Yamato just has better haki, and there's not really any particular ability that would give her, like, an advantage. It's not like she has Future Sight or anything. But overall, she should have better haki, at least based on what has definitively been shown. As for how a fight between these two would actually look, I really don't see what Kuzan would do against Yamato. Again, he hasn't really completely frozen anyone who actually has good haki. His ice weapons are completely featless and were pretty easily dealt with by a casual shockwave from a Whitebeard that wasn't even looking at him. His ice blades didn't seem threatening in the slightest and are essentially featless. And we've seen that even casual vibrations from Whitebeard are capable of damaging his ice and cracking it. Like, I'm genuinely trying to think of a way in which Kuzan eventually wins this fight, and I just don't know what it is. But the reality is kind of just that he does not have good stats and doesn't have any win cons or any checkmate abilities. He doesn't have anything that you could say like, oh, a stat difference doesn't matter. He'll just do this and he'll win. Now, I want to reiterate again that I don't have a horse in this race. I didn't even intend to make this video. Someone simply asked me to make a video on this topic. But if you were to ask me who wins between these two, I would say Kuzan. If you even go back to my top 30 strongest characters in One Piece, I have Kuzan above Yamato. And the justification is pretty much just that Kuzan scales relative to old Garp more than anyone below him. And of course I had Yamato below him. But it's what I think is interesting about this topic specifically, because if we were just going by feats, I don't think that Kuzan has better feats than Yamato. I think they are relative, sure, but I think that overall Yamato has better feats in pretty much every single stat. And Kuzan doesn't have any abilities that would really give him an advantage, I feel, or even a win con. Again, even after this video and looking over things, I still think I would put Kuzan over Yamato, and that's why narrative is so important, or portrayal. Most people would have Dragon as a top 10 character, if not top 5 in terms of strength, when you can't even prove that Dragon is above base Kaku. So pretty much I'm just saying that I think that you can still think a character is stronger than another character, even if they don't necessarily have better feats. And even if in a more definitive breakdown like this, where you're talking about each individual stat and how a fight would actually look between them, they aren't necessarily favored. But other than that, feel free to let me know your thoughts and opinions on this topic. as well as any other topic you'd like to see me cover. Again, most of the videos that I've done that are like matchup based, I usually plan out and script, of course, where I obviously have an idea of who's gonna win within my head already. This is the first video I've made that's completely unscripted, and is literally just me essentially pulling up the manga and looking at the interactions and fights they have and how you can scale them. So I don't really mind doing this style of video, especially because scripting usually takes a while for me because I go on different tangents. But that's gonna be about it for me.